The plane hadn't landed yet, but the consequences had taken off long before that. At an altitude of 35,000 feet, in a luxurious cabin adorned with leather and champagne, a black man, Elijah Brooks, CEO of the tech company Covalent Grid, was removed from his business class seat simply because he didn't look like someone who should be sitting there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. Instead, he opened his leather-bound notebook, placed the earbud in his ear, and whispered a single command into the system he had created. Activate Level 3. Initiate full system audit. From that moment on, not just the flight, but an entire international airline began its descent. Systems malfunctioned, stocks plummeted, leadership resigned, APIs were disconnected, the media swarmed. Everything trembled just because they underestimated one man and misjudged his dignity. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was a declaration for justice laid out through data, and a powerful example of how the right silence at the right moment can shake an entire corrupt system. Are you ready? Like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to join us for stories full of emotion and justice. Like this one, let's begin the journey of Elijah Brooks, where prejudice was supposed to win, but was defeated by intelligence and determination. They had Elijah Brooks stand waiting at the gate while every other passenger walked past. It wasn't because his ticket had any issues, nor was his name missing from the list. It was simply because someone had decided that a black man didn't belong in the business class cabin. The eyes of everyone turned towards him, heavy with implication as if his very presence was a mistake. The check-in agent, a petite woman in a charcoal gray suit, ordered him to wait in a cold tone. She quickly glanced at his perfectly tailored gray suit, as if wanting to erase its existence with a single look. Soon after, she rummaged through his briefcase, as if searching for something mysterious, a scent, some kind of essence that only she could sense. Then she announced that there had been a change in seating. By regulation. Elijah didn't react, didn't panic. He had flown internationally 3 times just in the last quarter for Quantum Forge Solutions, the tech company he had built from scratch over the past decade. He knew exactly how airports worked, the priority standards, and how to move through VIP lounges with characteristic calm. But as he approached Gate B12 to board Flight 982 to Valera, the glossy stone floor beneath his feet suddenly turned into a public stage, one that he hadn't invited but was forced to stand the center stage on. The fluorescent light reflected off his polished suitcase, the one he had chosen carefully for its size, just enough to fit in the overhead compartment without drawing attention. Today, it attracted every gaze. The moment he held his ticket up to the scanner, the agent gave him a bitter smile, then began typing on the keyboard as if that could change the reality. There was no greeting. Instead, she called the manager, a silver-haired man, his arrogance clearly printed on his tailored suit. He opened his notes as though drawing out a weapon. "Name?" he asked, not bothering to glance at the papers Elijah had handed over. "Elijah Brooks, Seat 1F confirmed." "Last month," he replied, his voice calm but firm. He didn't look at the ticket. "How did you purchase this ticket?" His voice laced with suspicion. "Reward points. Employee discount." The question felt like a slap in the quiet room. "I bought the ticket in full business class. My company, Quantum Forge." Elijah answered his tone, cold and controlled. The man's smile grew razor thin. "You know, procedures are stricter now. There have been many unusual cases from people like me," he said. Elijah didn't argue, simply emphasized apply the same rules to everyone. After 5 uncomfortable minutes with everyone passing by throwing glances at him as if he were an intruder, they finally let him board the plane. No apology, no explanation, and certainly no recognition of his dignity. As he walked onto the jet bridge, Elijah struggled to swallow the anger rising inside him. A flight attendant stopped him at the cabin door. "Just a moment," she said, sniffing the air as though judging the leather briefcase in his hand. "We detected a strange smell." Elijah unlocked the bag. Inside were only a laptop, a stack of documents, and a leather notebook. She leaned down, inhaled again, as if searching for the scent of some invisible crime. "Maybe I was wrong," she said. Elijah looked straight into her eyes and said softly, "Or maybe you reported it without cause." She only smiled awkwardly, then pointed to his seat 1F as if he had only just been allowed to sit there, not that he had paid in full for it. He sat down, the leather cold against his back, but the fire inside him burned quietly, hotter than any heater. He knew exactly what they wanted, a reaction, an outburst, something to justify their prejudice, but he wouldn't give them that. Soon after, he noticed an old fanny pack resting on the seat, as if someone had purposely placed it there. Beside it was a scribbled note, "Temporary seat for unnecessary staff." Not printed on the airline's paper. A personalized insult marking his dignity. Around him, the cabin was silent as a cold stage. No one looked him in the eye. The attendant smiled at the other passengers but avoided his gaze. A nearby couple chuckled with mocking comments hanging in the air. Must have been upgraded for diversity. Must be a system hacker. The message was clear. He wasn't welcome. Every glance, every sneer, every unspoken rejection, everything was staged like a script. Then the man sitting next to him in seat 1G entered. The gold-plated watch gleamed under the cabin lights. He leaned toward a flight attendant. "Just asking, is the upgrade based on points, or has the airline handed it out for free?" His voice was soft, but it landed like a soft punch. Some passengers laughed out loud, the attendant blushed, and Elijah saw the confusion in her eyes. But he stayed still, his face showing no emotion. Another flight attendant offered champagne to the other man, then turned to Elijah, tilting her head slightly. "Would you like some juice or soda instead?" Her voice was like she was speaking to a child wishing for stars in the sky. Elijah replied in a monotone, "I'll have what he's having unless there's a problem." She pursed her lips, but poured the wine. The man raised an eyebrow. "No offense, but you look more like a hacker than someone who belongs here." His smile was one of victory. Elijah turned toward him, his voice as smooth as a calm lake. "And you look like the kind of person who inherits what they never earned." The other man's smile faded when the plane doors closed and the engines roared to life. Elijah remembered every detail: the strange bag, the scrutinizing eyes, the mocking smiles, and the complicit silence of the cabin full of people. At 35,000 feet, the picture of privilege and prejudice stood clear. Clean cold, served with a glass of wine and a sneer. But Elijah wasn't paranoid. He was perceptive. He folded the note, slipped it into his leather notebook, and for the first time his mask of calm revealed a moment of quiet anger. That was when a promise formed in his mind. No one on this flight would leave feeling like they had escaped justice. He would make sure of it. When the plane touched down on the runway in the city of Arena, they would discover that Elijah Brooks was not just a silent passenger. He was a force that no one in that cabin could have anticipated. And in that moment, every taunt, every pointed look, Every act of dehumanizing him would have to pay principal and interest. Elijah could feel the pressure rising in his chest, like the air in the cabin before it was compressed into a storm. He silently slid his hand into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out his phone. Not to argue or confront, but to record a voice memo. Simple, cold, capturing every word, every tone, every detail. He pressed the record button just as a flight attendant approached, moving as quietly as a shadow across the cabin floor. "Sir, we request that no recording devices be used at this stage of the flight." She said, her voice soft and stuttered. Elijah raised an eyebrow. In his mind, the answer was clear. "We're already cruising." The girl hesitated, glancing at the passengers around her before leaning down, almost whispering, "This is a security regulation. Some passengers feel disturbed." His heart pounded, but his face remained calm. Without responding, Elijah tucked his phone back into his pocket. In that moment, he understood in their eyes he was the problem, not the man in the seat across playing with discrimination or the curious stares of the entire cabin. On the other side of the aisle, the man in seat 1G, now known as Derek Langston, raised his glass with a mocking smile. "See?" he said lightly, toasting as if celebrating. "Rules are rules." A few passengers snickered, others nodded in agreement. Elijah stared straight ahead, his expression carved in stone. But inside, every insult was being recorded like a data code he was about to process. He watched as the flight attendant poured Derek another glass of champagne without asking. When she turned to him with a reluctant nod, her voice had grown colder. "Would you like another drink, sir?" Elijah shook his head. He no longer cared for the performance service. What he wanted was the truth, and he would get it. But not through anger, but through strategic silence. When dinner was served, Elijah pulled his leather-bound notebook from his bag. He didn't jot down the takeoff time or the meal served. He wrote codes, data diagrams, and ideas for his company's new security proposal. Not because he needed to work, but because sometimes the strongest form of resistance was moving forward. For Elijah, that notebook was sacred ground. No one could question why he was there. The silence was broken by a familiar voice from seat 1G. "Still working?" Derek leaned back, his victorious grin widening. "Seems like you don't take breaks, huh?" Elijah looked up, blinked once, then responded. "Almost." Derek laughed. "Bet you love doing what you do, especially when you don't have to fight for your seat." Elijah's chest tightened. Each word felt like acid dripping into a wound. The cockpit door swung open. The air in the cabin froze. Words fell silent. Seats were adjusted. All eyes turned toward the front of the plane. Elijah already knew what was coming, even before the captain called his name. A tall man, silver beard like ice, stepped forward toward Elijah's seat. "Mr. Brooks, I'm afraid we'll need to move you to another section of the plane." Elijah squinted. "Is there a problem?" The captain's face remained impassive. "We've received feedback regarding your inappropriate behavior and use of unauthorized devices. For safety reasons, we must change your seat." The entire cabin held its breath. Elijah could feel the eyes skimming over him like a thin blade. Once again, he was being accused not for behavior, but for his presence. "So, I'm being moved." Just because someone feels uncomfortable, he asked again, his voice calm as water beneath a thin sheet of ice. The captain didn't respond. He merely gestured. Two plainclothes security personnel stepped out from behind the galley silently, like walls shifting. One bent down, his tone practiced and cold. Sir, refusal to move may affect your future boarding privileges. The statement wasn't just a warning, it was a veiled declaration of war. Elijah understood immediately. If he refused, he would be branded a disturber, non-compliant, even dangerous. He stood up silently, but with his dignity intact. Behind him, applause erupted, not in welcome, but in acknowledgment, in confirmation. It was a performance. The final act of privilege at 35,000 feet. Derek smiled as if he had won a bet while the attendants continued their work as if nothing had happened. They guided Elijah through the business class curtain past the food prep area and to a metal folding chair reserved for the crew off duty. A cold metal chair, no cushion. Just temporary, one security attendant said as Elijah sat down without protest. No water, no apology, no explanation. He became invisible, expelled from comfort, respect, and sight. From that position, Elijah observed who looked over the curtain, who whispered explanations to the person next to them. The wrong was cloaked in the armor of procedure called security. Then a gap appeared in that wall of deceit. A few rows ahead, a young student with braided hair and wireless earbuds silently raised her phone and pressed record, she whispered into the camera. They moved him for no reason. He didn't do anything. The live stream began. The scene of the captain issuing orders, the security personnel silent, the indifferent applause. Everything was captured, spreading with the speed of an online storm. Outrage erupted. Viewers were angry, heartbroken, seeing the blatant discrimination that could not be denied. Elijah felt a little lighter. Someone had witnessed it. The truth had been broadcast, but the system didn't sleep. Just minutes later, a sharp-suited operations manager stepped up to the girl. He leaned down, speaking quietly enough so no one else could hear. "We don't allow filming on this flight." His voice wasn't a request. It was a threat. "Delete that footage," he said. The girl clenched her jaw, her eyes gleaming with determination. "I know my rights. This is a public space." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This is for security. If you don't comply, we'll report it when we land. You may be banned from flying." The threat hung like a dark cloud in the cabin. The girl hesitated, then silently shut down the live stream, her fingers trembling as she hit stop. The man stood smoothing his uniform as if he had just done something righteous. "I know my rights," the young woman said, her voice soft but clear. "This is a public space." The operations manager didn't shrug. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "This is aviation security." He replied, his words short but laced with a threat. "If you do not comply, we will file a report when we land. You may be banned from flying permanently." The words hung over her like a storm cloud. The girl hesitated, then, with trembling fingers, she turned off the live stream. The man stood up, smoothing his uniform as if he had just done something virtuous. From the auxiliary seat near the restroom, Elijah Brooks quietly observed the entire scene. The girl's shoulders slumped, and her phone gently fell into her lap. The surrounding passengers exchanged glances, a few offering looks of sympathy she couldn't see. In that moment, Elijah understood they weren't just trying to silence him. They were trying to silence anyone who could witness the truth. The anger inside him was no longer just personal indignation. It was now intertwined with a deep sorrow. Layer by layer, the cruelty became apparent. The initial insult, the enforced silence, and the stifling of unity. A flight attendant approached with a smile, as if pre-programmed, then gently bowed her head. Mr. Brooks, we've arranged a more comfortable seat for you in the back." He followed her down the narrow aisle past rows of seats to the last section near the restroom where the smell of disinfectant mixed with jet fuel. The seat was hard upright, placed directly next to the noisy service cart. She left without saying another word. Elijah sat down. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the coldness of the metal against his back. At this moment, he was no longer angry. He was calculating. For the next 20 minutes, Elijah mapped out the entire situation like a cybersecurity expert, tracing the steps of an attack. He analyzed every weak point, every vulnerable link, every area that could lead to legal responsibility. He noticed which employees hesitated before speaking, who intentionally avoided looking him in the eye, and who exchanged covert glances. What weighed on him now was no longer the insult, but the structure, a system carefully orchestrated to remove a person, simply because he didn't fit the mold they were used to. Elijah Brooks was not just a programmer. He was the creator of the system, a digital architect who could untangle wrongdoing and rebuild justice. When the plane began its descent, Elijah stood up from his jump seat and retrieved his leather notebook. He flipped to a blank page, then wrote a single line. All data. Arena. The next steps would come later. Each voice, recording each witness statement, every small detail would become a lever to force them to be held accountable. There would be lawsuits, media exposure, and boardroom turmoil. In his mind, headlines were already forming as the lights in the cabin flickered on. Discrimination in business class. Shakes the airline industry. He could feel the shockwaves beginning to spread through the media channels, through the regulatory bodies. When the wheels touched down in Arena, Elijah's honor had been tested in every possible way. They had tried to erase him, turn him into an invisible number, but instead they had created a living record of their bias measured by cold procedure and silent complicity. Elijah stood taller than ever before. He took a deep breath. No one on that flight would leave without feeling the consequences. Every decision, every cruel act, every cowardly minute, all would be paid for. He would make sure of that, and the world would witness it. At that moment, his wrist vibrated lightly. Elijah reached into the lining of his coat, tapped twice on the face of his watch. No one noticed as he gently placed the tiny wireless earbud into his right ear. His voice was low, and his lips barely moved. Activate Level 3. The words were concise and precise, as if he were operating a system in a security operations center. Start internal audit procedure for all secure connection logs from the last 30 minutes. Focus on gate activity. Any changes in seating. Scan all internal messages containing keywords. Override priority, passenger transfer, behavior notes, seat upgrade, push immediate alerts to the compliance department, activate emergency protocol, template C. There was no response, but Elijah knew the command had been executed. Covalent Grid's auxiliary systems. The software company he founded were designed for instantaneous operation. No latency, and he still held full control. A few rows ahead, a crew member wearing a gray vest was checking a tablet when he suddenly froze. A flashing alert appeared before his eyes. Wide-eyed, he tapped the screen twice, his face paling as he saw the text, Elijah Brooks, override detected, Level 3, authorization confirmed. He turned to his colleague, his voice choking. "Do you know who this is?" The woman furrowed her brow as she looked at the screen, then turned back to him. "Passenger 39E. The one we moved to the back," she asked quietly. He nodded. "No, it's the CEO." His voice was so soft it almost cracked. "He's the one who created the system we use to track crew schedules and route baggage, and he is auditing right now." Both of them stood frozen as reality hit harder than the plane outside which was descending. In the jump seat near the restroom, Elijah closed his eyes for a few seconds. He could hear the faint click of a screen, the hurried whispers among the flight crew. He opened his notebook, gently stroking the leather cover, where every page contained handwriting, source code, and his vision. For Elijah, that notebook was not just a journal. It was proof of his rightful presence that no one could deny. Elijah Brooks, CEO of Covalent Grid. The highlighted text appeared on the laptop screen of a young man preparing his presentation slides. The woman sitting next to him glanced over, then furrowed her brow. "Elijah Brooks. He's on this flight?" she asked softly. The young man laughed loud enough for a flight attendant passing by to hear. "Yeah, big meeting. He's the keynote speaker tomorrow." The attendant froze mid-step, her clipboard tilting slightly in her hand. Her eyes flicked to the curtain leading into the business-class cabin where she was sure she had seen that man. She just hadn't recognized him. The name Elijah Brooks echoed in her head like a reverberating sound coupled with memories of the cold, suspicious treatment they had given him just hours earlier. She lifted the clipboard as if looking for the procedure she needed to follow, but her hand trembled so much that she nearly dropped the stack of papers. She quickly tucked it under her arm and hurried to the galley. Her hand pressed firmly against her chest as if to steady the racing of her heart. At the front of the plane, the man in seat 1G, Derek Langston, vice president of a European investment fund, was lifting his whiskey glass when his tablet beeped with an urgent message. He furrowed his brow, opened the message from the Arena branch of Skyreach International Airlines, and froze mid-sip. Internal security alert, VIP treatment request. Senior leadership, Covalent Grid. The headline was accompanied by an official portrait of Elijah Brooks. Directly beneath it was a red warning line, Level A, Absolute Security. Do not share, do not delay. Derek's hand shook as he set his glass down. The taste of premium whiskey suddenly turned into the bitter flavor of regret. Just then, a young flight assistant was printing out a top-secret document from headquarters. The printer screeched as it spat out the first page with the headline, VIP Treatment Request. Senior Leadership, Covalent Grid. The second page clearly displayed Elijah's image with a note, Keynote Speaker, Business Strategy Conference, Restricted Area Access, Requires Specialized Badge. The assistant stared at the paper, her face turning pale. She turned to her colleague, her voice trembling. "Do you know who this is?" Her colleague shrugged, half smiling, half disdainful. "Passenger 39, the one we moved to the back." Then her gaze lingered on the printed paper, and realization hit her like a wave. Her face went white. "He's the CEO of the system we use to manage personnel and cargo logistics. Tomorrow, he's the keynote speaker." The murmurs, like a faulty engine, began to buzz among the crew members. A flight manager rushed over, pulling the assistant's arm. "We moved him to the back," she said, her voice grating through clenched teeth. The assistant nodded, not daring to look her in the eye. "He can revoke the airline's API access with a single command." The manager's face turned pale. This can't be overlooked. In the jump seat near the restroom, Elijah sat quietly, his hand resting on his leather notebook, his gaze calm. He could feel the air in the cabin shifting, a silent tremor spreading, replacing the mocking laughter from earlier with quiet panic. The cabin door opened as the plane slowly approached the gate. The captain walked toward the door, shoulders straight as usual. but his eyes wavered when he saw ground staff waiting with tablets displaying an urgent message from Covalent Grid discrimination violation report. Awaiting legal review. Time of command, less than an hour ago. The chief purser's earpiece blinked. Red sweat beaded on his temple. Behind the curtain, the crew whispered, exchanging worried glances. A technical manager whispered into the earpiece, "We've been disconnected. Covalent has locked down the sync system." In the Skyreach Operations Center, IT engineers stared at their screens as error reports continued to flood in. Coordination failures, API signal loss, baggage tracking interruptions. At the headquarters, several miles away, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. The stock chart on the screen had dropped more than 13% in just 1 hour. Public opinion on social media had plummeted to an all-time low. The legal department's inbox received 87 emails demanding an investigation and termination of contracts due to ethical violations and equality clauses. "We can't hold the front anymore," a board member said. The CEO sat motionless, his face ashen. In the next 20 minutes, the term brand image was mentioned 37 times. The meeting ended with a resignation announcement from the CEO in disgrace. Meanwhile, on the plane's stairs, the leaders who had just arrived to attend the forum in Orena opened their phones and immediately saw the prominent headlines, "Tech CEO discriminated against on partner flight," "Skyreach faces boycott wave Elijah Brooks, exposing bias at 35,000 feet. The silent journey, the deafening consequences." Though the video quality wasn't perfect, the clip capturing Elijah being escorted from the business class seat, his calm face amidst mocking applause, was enough to stir public outrage. Hashtags began to spread: "Your business class," "Seat sale," "Skyreach," "Shame," "Justice." For Elijah, venture capital funds issued a warning, and a European logistics platform suspended API integration with Skyreach. A group advocating for equality issued a statement. "We do not collaborate with organizations that normalize exclusion." Social media became a courtroom, and the airline now stood in the public's dock. When Elijah Brooks stepped off the plane, he was the last to leave the cabin. There were no cameras, no applause, only dense silence, the shiny aisle reflecting his steps, and the averted gazes of the crew. The rolling suitcase behind him wasn't just luggage. It was a living proof of a silent battle that had been won. Skyreach International's legal inbox continued to buzz with a flurry of lawsuits and legal notices from 5 major software suppliers. All threatened to terminate partnerships if the airline did not swiftly address the systemic discrimination. In the following days, Skyreach was forced to issue a formal apology issue, compensation credits to the affected passengers, and announce a comprehensive investigation into its diversity and inclusion policies. Several mid-level flight crew members were suspended for investigation, while the manager overseeing the morning shift at the gate that day was reassigned. The airline's board of directors voted to cooperate with independent auditors to review all security access logs, ensuring that no loopholes due to bias would persist. Meanwhile, Elijah's keynote speech at the Orena conference had to be delayed by 12 hours due to the overwhelming media attention disrupting the schedule. Then, when he took the stage steadfast, his suit neatly tailored, the entire auditorium stood and applauded. It wasn't a polite round of applause. It was a standing ovation for justice being served. In his speech, Elijah did not mention revenge. He spoke about responsibility, the power of data and transparency, how they could eliminate bias and restore trust when used correctly. His voice was soft, but resonated throughout the auditorium. At an altitude of 25,000 feet, We saw how easily a person's dignity can be stripped away. But data, when preserved and acted upon for justice, can bring it back. The applause thundered like a storm. Elsewhere, in a small apartment in the suburbs, a 65-year-old woman watched the broadcast live on her TV screen. She wasn't an investor nor a programmer, but in her eyes, this story was living proof that injustice could exist in even the most seemingly perfect places. And it was also clear proof a single person with determination and meticulous preparation could bring down an entire biased system. Elijah Brooks didn't need to yell, didn't need to break any processes. He simply flipped the switch, activating the very system they used to exclude him. And when the truth came to light, the consequences came swiftly, forcefully, and decisively. Among those most severely impacted was Damian Holt, the CFO at a mid-sized financial firm specializing in government contracts. His face appeared in the 10-second viral clip. His smug smile as Elijah was escorted off clapping in approval. The online community was unforgiving. His face was plastered with words like arrogant, discriminatory on the brink of a lawsuit. Just hours later, 25 complaints flooded his company's inbox, and their quality policy page crashed from the overwhelming traffic. On the third day, Damian's company issued a statement. Mr. Holt's remarks and actions on Flight 3982 do not reflect our core values. The final line read, effective immediately, Mr. Damian Holt is no longer with the company. They tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but leaked internal emails revealed that Damian had viewed Elijah's presence as a failed humanitarian campaign. Even the directors within his own company didn't dare to defend him. The contract dissolved. Ironically, a cybersecurity firm that had signed with Damian's company immediately terminated the agreement overnight. His personal website led to a 404 error. His LinkedIn account vanished. He sat in his darkened apartment, curtains drawn. His phone rang incessantly, with missed calls from former colleagues and countless interview requests from the media. He couldn't avoid. The second person caught in the whirlwind was Clara Jensen, the head flight attendant whose name appeared in too many of the viral clips. Her cold demeanor refusing to explain Elijah's seat change had sparked an outcry. A retired judge sitting 2 rows ahead and a school principal both filed detailed complaints. Within days, a petition calling for SkyReach to overhaul its anti-bias training gathered over 600,000 signatures. A viral meme placed Clara on the throne of Employee of the Month with a photoshopped crown placed over the airline's logo, which was engulfed in flames. The internal investigation was expedited under public pressure. The result, discriminatory and unprofessional behavior, was confirmed. She was fired the following morning. SkyReach's board of directors convened an emergency meeting at the coordination center near the airport. On the screen were the statistics showing a 13% drop in stock price, an API error warning due to Covalent Grid's system lockout. Shareholders pounded their fists on the table, collectively demanding there must be a cultural overhaul immediately. The phrase brand image was repeated so many times it became an empty mantra. The CEO was pressured to resign. The airline refunded passengers and quietly sent personal apology letters to the affected customers. When Elijah Brooks left Arena Airport, no one dared approach him. He pulled his suitcase through the silent lobby, where each step echoed on the polished stone floor like a bell signaling a new chapter in modern justice. The reporters and gate staff avoided his gaze as the headlines on passengers' phones continued to flash. Tech CEO discriminated against. Airline faces total crisis. Justice at 35,000 feet. One man, one system. One truth. This wasn't just a wave of social media outrage. This was justice by data. For the 65-year-old woman sitting in her living room watching on TV, it was a living lesson. The persistence of one individual combined with meticulous preparation could overturn a long-standing system immersed in bias. Elijah Brooks didn't break the law. He didn't make a scene. He flipped the switch of their own system. Every log, every sneering word, every dismissive glance was recorded. And when the truth was brought to light, the repercussions came fast, hard, and sharp as a knife. Not revenge, but precision. The story of Elijah Brooks didn't end at Arena Airport. It spread from that airplane from the last seat where he was forced to sit to millions of computer screens and phones across the world. It became a symbol of awakening for a system that once seemed invulnerable, now held accountable. He didn't need to shout. He didn't pound the table demanding justice. Elijah only needed a notebook, an audit, and an unwavering stance. At an altitude where people believe there are only white clouds and comfortable seats, Elijah showed the world prejudice may fly with you, but justice can land first. This story is not just about one man being discriminated against. It's about every averted gaze, every mocking laugh, and every act of complicity that was called out for what it truly was. And more importantly, it's the story of anyone who has ever been misjudged just because they were different. For those who have been forced to give up their seat, for those who have been told you don't belong here. Remember, you have the right to exist, to succeed, and to stand tall even when the whole world is sitting down. If this story resonates with you, if you believe that data can protect dignity, if you want to see justice given back to those who deserve it, then don't forget to like this video to spread the emotion. Share with your loved ones and friends. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more moving, profound, and powerful stories.